in and they say that, oh, they want to file a patent, and we say like, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. And later on, if they want to do a startup, they probably do by themselves, not coming back to the office. But I'm just curious, like what's the, I don't know what the word for that, but like, why would students always come back to your office to get help? How do you position yourself to make sure that students are aware of all of this?
Well, we don't always care if they come back to us. So I have two stories. You already heard about Google. They worked on this technology using Stanford facilities for about 4 years in a library project. So clearly it was owned by Stanford. But the Yahoo boys came from Stanford also, and they had developed this platform in the dorm, and they came to our office and said, we don't think this is Stanford's. And again, under our patent policy, if it was a student and they didn't use our resources, it didn't belong to Stanford. So we said, no, it's not ours, go in peace. So they started Yahoo without a license from Stanford, did really well, as you know. And they came back to Stanford, gave money to Stanford. We have a beautiful big building from them. And so again, we felt we were fair, that we legitimately said, this is not ours, go in peace, be successful. And they were successful, and they were grateful to Stanford for helping them, and they gave back to the university. So again, you don't have to always get the return through licensing. I feel like we're not grabby. I mean, we don't insist that everything come through our office if it doesn't really need to come through our office. So if the Tableau student didn't really want to come through OTL and we had dropped it, they probably could have gone and started a company. But for some business reason, I think they decided that it would be nice to take a license from Stanford. It's a clean bill of health. There's never going to be an issue about who owns this technology. So in a way, it's insurance to come back through the university and know that they have rights to technology.
May I ask, how is the entrepreneur team size when you start to fund the team?
We don't fund the team because the entrepreneurs come to our office and decide they want a license. So they have to go find investment money on their own. They just get an official agreement with us that says they can commercialize this technology. And they have to pay us. We're not paying them. So then they have to go, what they do is typically say, okay, now we have a license. Investors, come invest in our company. We have a great idea. We have a business plan. Invest in us. And then that's when the company is able to start. Now, as you know, it's sometimes a chicken and an egg, right? You need the license in order to raise money, but you don't have any money to take the license. So many of us have these things called options. It's sort of dibs. So I'll pay you a little bit of money for 6 months, and then I know that I'll be able to take a license if I can raise money. And then they go and say, I have this option that if you fund my company, then I can take this license. And so it's cheaper at the beginning than a full-blown license. It's easier. And so we do a lot of options for these companies. Now, many of the companies never start, and so the option just goes away. And others, they do exercise their option, and they legitimately start a company.
So I'd like to follow on. Here's a microphone. I'd like to follow on a little bit what you said about a clean bill of health for the technology. Can you expand a little bit about why that's important for the new company, why it's important for the university, and for the investors?
I would say the investors want to make sure there's no problem with acquiring the technology. And particularly if the technology comes from university research, they really want to be sure the university is okay with the technology going to a company. And so if there's not what we call clear title, if there's a little bit of a cloud around the title, then there's more chance of a lawsuit in the future that something was handled improperly. Now, a lot of people feel like, well, you know, a lot of the technology can go out the back door, we say, go under the table. I always say, I don't really worry about that. If it's a company that is not successful and it went out the back door, nobody cares, right? If it's successful, we will find out about it, and somebody is going to raise this as an issue with the company. And so again, typically if it's a big company who's doing well, they have competitors, and the competitors are always looking for a weak spot. And title to the invention, to the basic technology, can sometimes be that. So that's why many companies, if they're careful, want to make sure that they have all the rights that they need to practice the technology, and the easiest way to do that is a license from the university.
All right, one more follow-on. Calculating royalties or setting royalties for licensing can be hard. You don't, like you said, you don't have all the information. It's hard to know even if you'll get any money. What are pros and cons of avoiding royalties altogether, either by milestone payments or by upfront fees?
At the end of the day, an earned royalty means that the company is selling a product and they're going to pay you a percentage of that product. So they've commercialized the product and you're going to get a piece of the action. So ultimately, as I said, from our numbers, we have better returns on the earned royalty. Now the milestones or any kind of flat payment along the way is just guess. A royalty is based on a sale, so you have to keep track of that. But is $100,000 every year reasonable, or should it be $1 million or $500? That one's very hard to negotiate, particularly if you don't know what their sales are going to be. So typically we'll ask for a business plan. Now a company might give us if they give you the same business plan as they give to the investors, usually it's a little bit inflated, right? We're going to make more and more sales than they really can make. If they're giving you a business plan that's too low, you're not even going to think that they can commercialize the technology. So we usually try to have them give us a business plan, and we look at their commercialization and what they think they're going to charge for a product, and then try to decide what is the profit margin and what is our fair share of that. We're not trying to gouge the company, and because we're universities, we're not necessarily trying to maximize income and even optimize. We're not a company, and we don't have a lot of that inside information. But what we want is a fair share for our contribution to the product. And we want our inventors to get recognized for their inventive contribution. And so when you make that pitch, that argument to a company, a lot of them really want a good long-term relationship with the university, and they will be, reasonably fair. Because again, if the company is not honest with us, we're never going to want to work with them in the future, and then they will have no hope to get new technologies. The same with yourself, the university. If you try to be too aggressive with companies, they might find you too hard to work with, and they won't come back either. So again, it's a relationship that has to work for both parties. So you have to be reasonable. As I said earlier, it's reasonable is in the eye of the beholder. The company never wants to pay anything, right? And the inventor thinks their invention is worth way more than the company thinks. So you have to find the balance, the middle ground. And that's not always easy. Sometimes you have to negotiate inside with your own inventor more than you have to negotiate outside. because sometimes the inventor's expectations are not realistic.
So now it sounds like everything's structured right, but obviously this took time and it was probably a process of iteration.
Yes.
Are there certain events or certain things happen that say, okay, we need to adjust how we structure it? For example, has an investor ever get back to you and say, well, you know, or even a vendor say, well, I'm trying to raise money, but an investor says that royalty, cash royalty is too high, or maybe an investor or an vendor comes back and say, okay, well, actually, I'm ready for that licensing fee because the investors makes that a precondition of investment. Can you just tell me just some of the iteration that's gone in the last
yes.
years?
As I said earlier on, many times a license agreement is renegotiated over time. Let's say they start and they have some investors and they're developing the technology and now they want some more investors, and that investor says, no way, this royalty is too high. So then the company come back to us. I don't know how other universities are, but we're always willing to listen. And you know, they're always negotiating the royalties lower. It's never that they say, we want to pay you more. So they're saying, we can't pay you this much because it's going to cost us this much, and we have to get patents from that entity, and we have to pay someone else this. And so then what we try to do is, again, we try to check to see if we think their argument is reasonable. If there are other patents that they didn't know that they need to pay on, then we'll adjust. We don't want to be the only ones to adjust, though. We want everybody in the chain to adjust. So we'll say, you can adjust it lower, but then we'll say, but no lower than some floor, so that we won't have zero, you know. Yes, yes. So equity and royalties or milestones, all of it is tradable. You have to look at the big picture. You know, it's very easy to negotiate one thing. You say, oh, this milestone's too high, and then you lower it. But what you want to do is say, this milestone's too high, lower this, but let's make up the payment later on or through earned royalties. So trade off things. It's a whole package, not just one component of the financials. Again, that takes experience. I would say we were into our office, 15 years before a person that we hired always looked at things in the whole. If she gave in on one thing, she wanted more later. And it was a really good lesson because it's too easy to focus on the one thing and say, okay, we'll lower this, and forget that you can make it higher. You can make up for it later. I think you're all tired. It's been a long day.
So from your experience, you see the technology in the past, and what do you think about in the future? Because, I mean, now it's like, I don't know if it's too expensive or it's too cheap, right? When you want to raise fund or something.
So I think tech transfer, especially in Asia, is going to blossom. It's going to really become very, very much more important as you learn how to do this. So I think it's a good investment of all your learning to try to learn how to do this more efficiently. Now, I can't predict what technologies are going to be the winner out there. Certainly, we all know that AI is coming. We have driverless cars, but you know, energy, climate, biofuels, et cetera, all of these are in the future. We know that. But again, I think there's more and more feeling by governments that if we can do technology transfer better from universities, because the governments are the ones, the taxpayers are the ones who are investing in early stage research, but they want to see some output. And if we can transfer university knowledge faster to industry, I think there's a view that the economy can grow faster. It is a technology world nowadays, and everybody is smart throughout the world, so their good ideas come from everywhere. So again, I think if we learn how to transfer those good ideas to private industry so that they can take advantage of the research. I think it'll be success for all.
So we know that big corporations are the ones that typically go to the universities to try to get a license and license the technology. And a lot of studies that I've seen show that sometimes a lot of technology is wasted because the big corporations will just get licensed technology, put it on a shelf, sometimes just get it so that no one else will use it.
Exactly.
And so do you have, what is the history of, do you have later stage startups actually approach the university and say, we would like the United States? So for example, we're going to have startups in AI and IoT. They can't do the heavy advanced research.
Right.
But they want to do the commercial application part. They can do that part. And are you seeing an increasing number of startups that actually go into the university to get this
Yes,
research?
we're actually seeing a lot of small and medium companies coming to the university. So in the very, very big picture, we divide up the world into life sciences and physical sciences, and then small companies and large companies. So I'll start with the grim news. Large physical science companies, IT, semiconductor, all of those, they don't like us. They don't want to take licenses from universities. Their product has too many patents. When a university comes forward with one patent and the computer has 500,000 patents, they're not interested in our technologies. So actually, we're very frustrated about that, and you'll see in the US, there are some universities that are suing these big companies because they won't take licenses. They're ignoring us. So we want to get their attention. But in general, they don't. The big physical science companies are not taking so many licenses. The big pharmaceutical companies are taking non-exclusive licenses to tools. Again, most big companies now are risk averse in many ways. And they just as soon let the smaller companies de-risk the technology for several years, and they'll either partner with the smaller company or they'll acquire them. So then we find that small companies, physical sciences, we see a fair amount of activity there. These are people who have a vision, think they can make something work, but again, they have the vision, but sometimes the big companies don't. And so they're going to start a small company and eventually be acquired. There used to be a joke at Stanford that all these little physical science companies got acquired by Cisco. So that is still happening. We're selling small physical science companies. For most university tech transfer offices, the biggest activity is life sciences, small companies, startup and small companies. They don't have the ability to do a lot of research. It costs a lot of money to do research in life sciences. And so they will take some university technology, develop it further, maybe 3 or 4 years, de-risk it a little bit, and then partner with the larger companies. The larger companies sort of like having the technology not so early stage, just a little bit more developed. And then they're willing to pay more for de-risk technology and work with the company to company rather than university companies. So we don't find many licenses that are exclusive licenses from big pharma to universities. So in general, most of us are finding that it's the smaller companies that do take licenses, which is hard for the US to get into the non-US markets. For us to know what the smaller companies are in other countries is very, very difficult. So again, we typically will license the smaller companies closer to our region.
Is there a kind of a catch-22? Because in one sense, as far as exclusivity and non-exclusivity, the smaller companies have the vision, you know, so they can see the opportunity. So that's good to the license to them. However, because of their size, there has to be some hesitation. So, well, can they deliver? Can they go ahead and really commercialize this? So is that a kind of a, you know, that balance there? Is that part of the decision?
Yes, well, as you mentioned earlier, okay, in the rare occasion when there's a big company and a startup who are interested in a technology, how do we make the decision? The big company has a lot of experience, they have money, they have all the processes in place. they could do it. We know that they can. Then you have the startup who has the passion, no money, no experience usually, but they care very much. So our experience is a lot of times the large companies take the license and then work on it a little bit, and then they change strategic direction and they put it on the shelf. And that is the worst thing that can happen to any of our technologies. So as I said earlier in my talk, the diligence is very important. We don't know if the small company can be diligent or not, but we will work out a diligence milestone so that they have to tell us every year how they're making progress, and if they're not making progress, they terminate the license. Same with the large companies. If they're going to take a license, we want them to have diligence. And interestingly enough, it's many of the large companies that don't want diligence. They don't want to have to promise to develop anything because their plans change all the time. So that helps in deciding which company to go with. It turns out, I think, for many of us, we feel that the passion of the inventor, they have to make it work if that startup is going to be successful. And because they have to make it work, they're going to try harder. The big company doesn't have to make it work because there's always more projects that they can work on. So many times we do choose a startup over the existing company. Now sometimes, even in this case, where an existing company knows that there's startup interest, they'll defer to the startup because they know they can acquire the company or partner with them later. So usually we try to work things out. You want to be done? Get out of class early? There's some more.
I'll follow up, and this is a big picture question you've kind of touched on. If you think of the pipeline, the global pipeline of technology, like you said, it comes from everywhere. And there are obviously changes going on. How does licensing and tech transfer play into that, and how can licensing and tech transfer play into it and make things better?
Well, as I said, we're a bridge, right? The university culture is very different from the corporate culture. And, you know, I mean, in so many ways, the corporate culture is proprietary and secret, and you have to wear badges and can't tell anybody anything that you're doing. University is very open. We publish everything. You know, we share. So the two aren't really compatible unless they have some experience working with each other. I think that there is definitely more of a sense of universities and industry working more closely together. Everywhere, even in the US, we're trying to get a better return on our investment in federal research and development dollars. And everybody wants to make this better, easier, faster. Companies' time is money. And universities, we don't have that same sense of urgency. And I think companies, probably rightly so, complain about universities as being slow and we can't make our decisions and it takes too long for anything to happen. So I think as universities get more experience in technology transfer, we'll do it faster, we'll get more processes in place, we'll have more standard agreements, we will have standard provisions that companies already know about, which is why we put our agreement on the web. Because any company that wants to learn how we do our business and look at what our agreement looks like can just download an agreement. And if they can't agree to some of the fundamental provisions, then maybe we're not the right source of new technologies. But by and large, we're able to negotiate almost everything. We don't want to put our endowment at risk. We want to be able to publish. We have basic university principles that we have to keep. But everything else, even the financials, are all flexible and negotiable. So again, as I say, if you're flexible and you understand the needs of this other party that you're working with, then usually you can work out an agreement that is good for both sides. Ask another question. You? Where do you think tech transfer is going in Thailand, for instance?
Wow, okay. I think tech transfer is growing. I think there is greater interest and a lot of skill building and knowledge exchange like this. I think, and this might be very controversial, so I'm not representing anybody. I am throwing this out for brainstorming purposes. But I think that the Thai legal system, the Thai monetary system, and the Thai business culture is quite different from both the UK and the US.
Yes.
Probably, I've lived here 7 years, which is not that long, and I'm obviously not Thai, so probably even more different than I realize. And I think that for technology transfer within Thailand, it may end up looking very unfamiliar to technology transfer specialists from other countries. The thing that I hope and that I am passionate about contributing is that I hope there is more technology transfer from Thailand sort of into the global pipeline, because there are good ideas here.
Yes.
And the world needs them, not just Thailand.
Right.
And I hope that with this type of exchange, we start to build those connections and those bridges.
One of the things that I mentioned in a previous session is that you can form your own technology transfer group. You know, we have this autumn Association of University Technology Managers that is worldwide, but you can create one even just in Bangkok or for Thailand, and that you meet regularly and exchange information and share best practices or any practices that you have, any problems that you have. It's really fun to talk to your colleagues because you are sharing the same problems, and then everybody has different solutions for the same problems, and you can pick the solution that works best for your environment. Teach each other and share, and that will be your best hope of raising the whole level of the profession.
Much structural reforms needed legally here. It's also the IP enforcement. So
Yes.
the legal system, it takes a long time to, if you have an IP infringement, to bring it up. And unfortunately, what happens is so our neighbor Singapore, they have a really totally different mindset. So the way they attract entrepreneurs is that they don't care about employees. They don't care if you have a startup, you employ anybody in Singapore. We want to be the holder of your IP because if you're successful,
They will be
we can brand it. We can brand it as this is a Singapore-based company, and they do it all the time. But everybody looks at Singapore as a great startup hub. Most of the successful startups in Singapore aren't even Singaporean. They're Indonesian, they're Thai, they're Vietnamese.
Yeah.
These are, where countries where the IP enforcement is not that strong.
Right.
So they go there, they house the IP, and then they end up just doing licensing agreements. So the actual startup where they're based, the country they're based, they're just just a
holding
center, just
country.
a holding, yeah. So they do all the work, have a licensing agreement, and all the money goes into the Singapore registered company, IP's protected there, and then the Singapore company just pays the Thai company just enough to cover the costs, because the taxes are much higher here too. So Thailand's losing on the branding battle because we have a lot of great startups, but the world doesn't know that those are Thai startups a lot of times, and so it's kind of frustrating working here in the tech startup community, seeing all that happen. So hopefully there'll be more reforms in that, and we look at it from not just the startups, how many jobs they create, What's the aggregate income? No, look at it as, okay, what innovation are they creating?
Right.
And how is the country leveraging that innovation to help the bigger companies where the innovation can be leveraged more?
Right.
It helps the economy in general. Plus, set themselves as a center of innovation, which will attract more resources,
Right.
more stakeholders here. That should be more the mindset here.
Mindset, yes.
Yeah.
You need to claim your birthright. If the ideas come from Thailand, claim them.
Because we do have a lot of great talent here. And
Yes.
There's a lot of talented people here.
Yes.
But it's, not
And
seen.
that's the challenge for leaders, political leaders, government leaders, is how do you measure the impact of technology transfer? And as I said, it really shouldn't be about money because it goes up and down. It can't be just about patents because you can file on everything. It can be licenses. Licenses is not a bad one at all, but many licenses go nowhere. So I feel like the metrics is very much more nuanced than the leaders realize, and that you have to take all of these into consideration rather than just one. It's easy to say, oh, it has to be income, and if you're not making a lot of money, then you're not doing well. That's not true, because again, it takes a long time for many of these innovations to come to fruition. The one case that has made the most money for Stanford, it took 14 years in the patent office before the patent issued. And so, it was really good technology, but it wasn't until 14 years later that we could even get any royalties off of it. We had actually already given up. Our patent attorney still was trying to prosecute this patent. We just thought, oh, there's no way there's going to ever be a patent. At the end of the day, she got a patent, and we were able to make a lot of money on it. We have a lot of stories like that. What we feel when we look back at these stories is that they're a surprise, that you couldn't expect it necessarily. This functional antibody, our biggest money maker, we didn't even think it was going to make any money. For 14 years, we had already given up on it. So again, you can't always tell what's going to be a winner. And again, I think reputation is very important. You want to be known as a technology advance